Hey, this is David Rovics. I'm back with a little extra second episode of Discussions with David. Today we're doing an afternoon session at a little less usual time for me. Usually I'm broadcasting at 10 a.m., but we're doing a little bit of an afternoon thing, and we are you can find all of these episodes archived at my YouTube channel, youtube.com/drovics, and in podcast form. You'll find this if you look for This Week with David Rovics, wherever you get your podcasts. And today I'm very happy to be spending an hour talking with my old friend Saed Bannoura, who is founder of the Independent Middle East Media Center and veteran of the First Intifada, and Palestinian-American now, one of my fellow Americans, a fellow U.S. citizen now, living here in Portland, Oregon. It's safer to be a U.S. citizen. It's harder for them to deport you when you have a U.S. passport, I hear. Good to have you on, Saed. And I was before having you on, I was just looking at the Independent Middle East Media Center's wonderful and very snazzy-looking website, imemc.org. And it's just like, I'm thinking like, oh, what shall we talk about? There's a lot I want to talk about with Saed, but then looking at this website, just to give people a little idea of what your life is like on a daily basis as editor of this website. Here we are. There's a little good news at the top. U.S. Reinstates aid to Palestine, and then the rest of it, it's like army attacks weekly procession in Kufr Qudum, injures a child. Soldiers abduct 5 Palestinians in West Bank. Israeli soldiers injure many Palestinians near Nablus. Israel transfers corpse of slain man to his family. This is all today.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to set the stage here. This is your life. You're the editor of this website, and you're also trying to live a life in addition to editing this website, but not much of a question, but what's it like? How is it like going from Portland to the sleepy streets of Portland to the war zone of this website constantly? It's a quixotic reality.
Yeah. Well, first, it's good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm sorry, I'm diving right in with the most heavy stuff. We'll get even more depressing after this. Okay? I haven't brought up the cages yet. I was just talking to my friend Keith McHenry, who was kept in a stress position cage. That's another topic. I want to talk about stress position cages. But yeah, sorry.
But it's it's really difficult to switch. Like, I'm not a computer. You can't switch from serious mode, all of these issues that are happening, and all of the violations, injuries, arrests, and the home demolitions, and then you just turn a switch off, and then you become the other guy who's like living his life. You have to try to balance your life around that, because this is something we have to deal with. And I have been doing this since the end of 2003. It's very heavy. It gets heavy on me personally,
Yeah.
It affects me, greatly. But then I try to balance myself back, to bounce back, and try to continue, because we need to continue this type of work.
That's what basically keeps you going, is that we need to do it. Huh?
We need to do it. We need to do it. And these things keep happening every single day, and not a lot of people are talking about it. Although there are various websites that talk about Palestine, still they aren't going in depth about the situation.
And most of those headlines in the IMEMC today, I don't think any of those headlines. I have, in the past 24 hours, I've watched, BBC, NPR, Al Jazeera, Reuters, and I have not seen any of those headlines anywhere.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's true. So we have to do it. There are the media agencies, unfortunately, especially the bigger they get, they try to sum it up in a couple of words, or mention it at the end of a certain news item, instead of going in depth and in detail about what's happening. People need to know the context of the conflict and the nature of what's happening, in order to understand. Like the person that they transferred his corpse back to his family today, he wasn't killed recently. But Israel kept his body there until today. They decided to transfer it back. This happens a lot. We have people who have been killed by the army or the settlers, and their corpses were never sent back to their families at all until this moment. And they are buried in what Israel calls the numbers graveyard. Each body has a number, and that's where they are kept.
They don't want to
Or
call it a mass grave, so they call it a numbers grave.
yes, yes. Instead of calling it a mass grave, they call it a numbers graveyard. And some, like the man from today, was killed a few months ago. But Israel kept his body there with them until they decided to transfer it today. And just to mention something, like his body was transferred to his family. Although Israel is trying to say that he tried to stab a settler, although he was on his land, which has been taken over by the colonial settlers, and he was just checking on his land when the attack against him took place and when he was killed. However, Israel is saying that he tried to stab one. But I have to mention something. When Israel claims that a Palestinian stabbed or attempted to stab or attempted to shoot an Israeli, their home is automatically demolished if they can prove it in any way. His home wasn't demolished because they know that their story is just a bunch of nonsense that they couldn't prove in any way, shape, or form. This is one of it, because the issue of home demolitions is a big issue that keeps happening every day on the ground, whether it is because Israel claims they didn't obtain a permit, or because it's an act of collective punishment against the family of a Palestinian they believe carried out an attack against Israeli soldiers or settlers. This is another form of collective punishment that's illegal under international law, but widely practiced.
So just switching gears here a little bit, there's somebody on Facebook asking, I think, a very pertinent question, actually. And in light of, I'm just rephrasing it here for our listeners' sake, but basically in light of the Capitol siege on January 6th and other events, there's a lot of talk about deplatforming, or not a lot of deplatforming, a lot of people losing their Facebook and Twitter accounts around the world. And of course, efforts that may start out at least pretending to be taking on the right, of course, end up being used against the left, against Muslims, against Palestinians, against so many other groups in the world that actually end up being the victims of these kinds of policies. And so somebody is just wondering about, apparently Facebook is, and I don't know if you know more about this than me or whoever's writing on here, but Facebook is considering or planning on changing their understanding of anti-Semitism to include anti-Zionism.
Yeah. There have been an article about that is just even more than Facebook, because when you try to define anti-Zionism and as anti-Semitism, that's one of the most dangerous things that you can come up with, because you can criticize a state, you can criticize a country for its practices, for its violations, for its occupation. It doesn't mean you are criticizing or being racist against a group of people because of their faith. So that's a very dangerous aspect, and they are also ignoring, when they try to do that, they are also ignoring the Jewish voices that are against this occupation and against this oppression. So they're gonna try to have, like, to balance their dual standards. How do we define this and how do we define that? And at the end of the day, it's just a violation of the people's freedom of speech and expression. And it's just they are trying always to mix and balance. Oh, this is you criticize Israel, then you are an anti-Semite. Although you are just criticizing the act, which is the illegal occupation, and you are calling for ending this illegal occupation as opposed to ending a state.
Mm-hmm.
It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous and shouldn't be allowed to go through. And in fact, which is not very similar, but a while ago we received a message from Facebook telling us that our page is could be removed because of violations to our so-called community standards. This pending removal is still there, although it's been like so many months back. And I managed to actually talk to Facebook, and I was
Really? You
talking.
actually got through to somebody?
Yes, I got through to somebody, but it doesn't matter because I was talking to him, and he was like, just make sure there isn't any other violation, and you're gonna be fine. And I said, my question isn't that, and I repeated my same question several times. I said, what is the alleged violation to your community standards? And then he repeated, there was a violation to our community standards. And I again said, what are the community standards that we allegedly violated? And he said, you can go to our Facebook page and read our community standards. And I said, you are not answering my question. I know the community standards. What are the standards that we violated? Can you pinpoint and give me, this is what you violated? Of course, nothing happened.
Nothing. Wow.
Yeah. They have nothing because there is no violation of the community standards. The only violation is, being critical of the Israeli occupation. That's like the only violation.
Right, presumably being flagged by somebody who didn't like the content.
Yes, exactly right. That's the exact the whole thing. And our page wasn't removed, but we know of so many other pages, Facebook pages, that were actually removed for these alleged violations.
British socialists are getting a lot of pages removed, I've noticed, among others. But doing journalism in one form or another since before social media or anti-social media came into existence, I wonder what's your impression of just how the words get out there and what the discourse is like generally out there in the world around Palestine or anything else in the pre-Facebook as opposed to post-Facebook? Have you noticed particular trends?
Well, of course, I lived through what we call the First Intifada in 1987, and then, of course, the Second Intifada and all what happened since. Things were different. Like in my hometown, Bet Sahor, we, for example, refused to pay taxes to the occupation. We said, no taxation without representation. And we were under siege for more than 40 days. The Israeli army would break into homes, stores, pharmacies, supermarkets, and just empty them, put everything in trucks, and then arrest the owner and take them away. Back then, I'm talking about an era where nobody had internet or mobile phones or mobile, if you had a camera, one of those old style cameras, you were considered really rich.
But the details about what that kind of thing that you're talking about, the Israeli army coming and dumping out all the food. I mean, I was a young adult at the time, and I was a news junkie living in the New York area, reading all sorts of international news. And this was just like what was happening there under the occupation was just almost completely censored, as far as I could tell. I mean, I read nothing about that stuff.
And I'm not, and of course, I'm not surprised. So things were different. Right now, like if what happened back then happened today, you will see like videos on social media, photos. Everybody has a smartphone of some form or shape. But back then, we're talking about an era where there was no internet. Most people didn't even have a landline at home. So there was like I witnessed all of these invasions and literally thefts of shops and pharmacies, workshops like blacksmith, carpentry workshops, and just they take the machines, take the medicines from the pharmacies, and they arrest the owners, and then they just go as a form of collection of these taxes. This was all happening, and not a lot of people were not you knew about it. There are some media agencies tried to come and did some report here and there, but it didn't get this wide coverage. Whether it was during the tax resistance or during also in Bet Sahur, we also there was an incident where the soldiers stopped a bunch of young guys and asked them for their IDs, and they gave them their IDs, and while they were checking the ID numbers with their wireless device, walkie-talkies, the soldiers started punching and slapping one of the guys,
Mm.
uh, uh, and he, couldn't. He just responded. He slapped the soldier back, and they ran away anyway. So that's when that guy threw his ID on the ground, and then everybody who saw him went to the soldiers, took their IDs out and threw them on the ground as a form of resistance. Everybody threw
Mm.
their ID cards, and thus we
Mm.
were under siege again for like 40 days, nightly arrests, and you cannot leave your home. It was a very tough era, but also there is a sense of pride and like people weren't depressed. It's like this is what you
Because
do.
they were resisting. They were
Yeah,
really,
exactly. This is
despite
what
all
you.
the arrests but people would be detained and still are detained for months and years without trial, and then also tortured in detention is a very common
Yes,
practice in the
yes.
Israeli prisons. And are just as a, I guess, sort of a bit of a tangent here, but are those little cages very commonly used by the Israelis as well, in the stress position cages that are these small cages? I saw at a prison before the Israelis blew up the Kiam prison in southern Lebanon when I first met you in 2005. Before I went to Palestine, I was in Lebanon, and we went to visit the prison on the Israeli border that has since been blown up in 2006. The Israelis bombed it, but they had one of those stress position cages where people could where they would hold Hezbollah fighters until they completely drove them mad, or what, that was the idea, I guess, where they couldn't stand up or they couldn't sit down, those kinds of things. And I just I guess I'm just wondering if that's a particular phenomenon that you've heard a lot about.
Well, there have been various reports from human rights groups, both Israeli and Palestinian, about the techniques and methods of torture used against the Palestinian detainees, and of course against other Arab detainees. Uh, uh, there are various forms, including being tied to a chair, and shackled and tied to a chair with hands behind your back, sack on your head, and you are there for a very long time. And in most cases, people would come and beat you up or throw you down to the ground. Also, the practice of solitary confinement, which is another form of torture,
Mm-hmm.
by leaving someone in a cell for so long. And when we talk about those cells, we are talking about very dirty, uh, smelly cells that those people, detainees, are forced in for very long times. And if they are taken out of the cell, they are taken to be interrogated, tortured, and then returned back. So all of these things have been happening. This is not something new. And while there are some organizations that talk about it, it's still one of the taboos that really aren't being discussed a lot.
The fact that Israel is a torture state, systematically
Yes,
tortures prisoners.
part of interrogation is torture, and we have witnessed, we have seen so many reports about Palestinians who became disabled due to torture, and also many other prisoners died uh, while being tortured, which means they were killed.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, it seems like, when there are so many Palestinian deaths, it's not a big deal to the international media and politicians. It's like, just another Palestinian killed.
The sun rises in the east.
Yeah, that's practically it, which is
When
very unfortunate.
Yes, it is. And when the Great March of Return was happening, and Israel carried out an unprovoked massacre of civilians every Friday for a year and a half or so, It was big news for like the first 2 weeks, and after that, the weekly massacres just became routinized, I guess, in the eyes of the media.
It became like more of a routine. Yeah, that's another unfortunate fact. It becomes it becomes really dangerous when it's normalized.
Yep.
When
Because it becomes
what's
invisible.
new? Like people were like, what's new? This have been happening for long, so what's new? What's new is that we as human beings need to act to end it. You have to end injustice inflicted against any form of or group of people wherever they are. You can't just. It's not about just the Palestinian cause.
Hmm.
There is injustice all around the world, and it's inflicted by bigger imperialist powers such as the United States, of course.
Yeah.
But you have to end these types of injustice, and the Palestinian cause is one of those injustices that have been happening for so long and continues to happen, and unfortunately will continue to happen if nothing major happens on the
But
ground.
of course, and speaking of those connections between different struggles and different imperial powers, and the when you talk about during the First Intifada, the no taxation without representation, it's a wonderful harkening back to the American Revolution and
Yes.
the slogan, and also the use of slingshots. And slings, that was a direct reference to the Bible. Yeah, that was an intentional. I mean, that use of that weapon is an intentional sort of you're trying to get people to think of David and Goliath. Is that right?
In a way, yes. Although not everybody thought about it this way.
Okay,
You,
it
but
was otherwise just a convenient way to launch a rock,
it
basically. So,
is, yeah. It is, yeah. And what I would like to say is that when you're living under occupation, uh, there are various forms of resistance you can resist the occupation. You do with what you have. The Palestinians have tried various, methods. There have been of course, now we're seeing a rise in the boycott movement, which is really good. That's more of a global movement. It's not just inside Palestine.
Which it seems like absolutely necessary, isn't it? Because I mean, when we're talking about so many of these different, whether we're talking about Palestine or Syria, there's no way that these conflicts can be resolved only within those countries because there's so much having to do with other big powers, right? I mean,
they all have something to do with big powers. This is this is the reality, the unfortunate reality. It's always, it has to do with some power. We have seen how for example, the United States operates. If there is a leader who got elected somewhere and they don't like it, they would go and and remove this person. Other methods they use is that they would try to support the governments of other nations that are in cahoots with them with their policies. It's unfortunate, but this is how it is, and I believe that after we've seen the rise of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, there have been, politicians and leaders who started to feel the heat because they didn't expect it to get that powerful, but it did and continues to do so. That's why we've seen like all of those legislators and officials who are like trying to outlaw your
right,
right to boycott, which is like
right,
it's like a serious violation of your freedoms. Like if you are an American, even I don't care who you support or who you don't support, but if you are an American who keeps bugging us with all of those speeches about your right, your freedom of speech, your freedom of expression, your liberties, and then you say, but when it comes to the Palestinians, it's that no, that shouldn't happen. Then you're a liar. You're just I have many descriptions to use, but anyway, it's not either or. It's you either believe in justice, for all, or you don't.
Yeah.
You either believe in democracy for all, or you don't. You can't be partial. It's like, yeah, I believe in the people's right in this country to resist their leader because he is not democratic, or resist the occupation, but the Palestinians must shut up and not do that.
Yeah.
You can't have this duality. You either believe in the people's right, or you don't.
But there's this exceptionalism, isn't there? Especially
Always.
around Palestine, Israel, there's a particular exceptionalism, huh?
Yeah, always.
In this country.
That's one of the things that we continue to face.
Mm-hmm.
And
When, here in Portland, there's been a lot of different people involved in a lot of different activities over the past year around protesting against inequality, racism, the housing crisis, so much else that's all coming together at the same time. And just as somebody who has had decades of experience organizing in extremely difficult circumstances, I just want to ask really open-ended question about like what advice you have for a lot of, this, first of all, we're on my YouTube channel. Most of the people who watch these interviews are teenage anarchists, and socialists. And that's just my impression. I haven't done like a poll. And just for the young people who are on the streets of Portland today, who are facing problems like, facing prison time, facing a lot of police brutality, a lot of health problems involved with tear gas, a lot of mental health problems involved with being beaten by the police so often, a lot of issues, not to mention housing insecurity for a lot of these young people. But and then there's the infiltration by various government agents and people reporting to the FBI, et cetera. And there's people getting knocked on the door by the FBI and all these kinds of whole myriad of different kinds of things people are dealing with, all of which you have had a lot of experience with in one form or another. So I'm just wondering, for somebody coming up today in this weird country as it is now, or anywhere else, what advice you got?
Well, we have seen, various processes around the country. We have seen Ferguson. We have seen, we have seen also the issue of George Floyd, and also, while we have seen these mass protests of people who are expressing their anger and about what's happening there, but we have also seen how viciously they were attacked, whether it is by the police or by the media. I've seen so many things that people were like trying to spread around the internet. It's like, look at those guys. It's like they aren't protesters. They just want to destroy, and they just want to just cause destruction. And these types of things in every type of revolution, whether it's a mass revolution or a smaller revolution, and then they always happen. You will always have those enemies who will try to discredit you and say all of the horrible stuff about you. My advice for the people is that you be confident about what you're doing and practice your right to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And supposedly there is democracy in this country, and you have the right to protest. You have the right also to try to pressure your elected officials to change. But one of the unfortunate things here is that except of a few elected legislators in this country, members of the House or the Congress, everybody else is they are like copies coming from the same machine. They have to follow the same rhetoric of the people before them. Of course, as I said, except for a few who have a courage enough to speak out. And my advice for the people is just, practice your right to freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Anytime there is an infiltrator who tries to cause damage and destruction, that will be very, very harmful to the cause you are fighting for. So that's something to be really careful about. Because once there is this type of thing, then the government starts saying, okay, we have the right to do this against them because of what they have been doing. And
did you ever get like develop techniques that sneak at sort of sniffing out those people?
well, usually those people are the ones who are trying to ask a lot of questions about certain things.
Oh, that's why people don't like reporters or me, because I'm always one of those people. I'm always like, wow, you're so interesting. Let me ask you a million questions. They're like, who are you? Yeah.
Well, it depends on on where and what
context,
is
yeah.
happening when you are asking all of those questions, because people usually when people go to protest, they have something in mind and they agree on this certain injustice or issue, and they go to protest about it. But when people have so many questions that don't seem to be fitting there, then you have to be wary about that, especially if like someone, which also I think we have seen a case like that where someone who's actually an informant, and this person is trying to get the protesters to actually go do some damage.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
When this happens, then
Yeah.
we have a bigger problem, because that becomes the cause and justification for any action that's going to happen next by the police or the authorities. There's always this issue that arises,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately everywhere. But you just have to be careful. You have to believe in what you believe in, and as long as it's legit, it's your right. It's not easy. No, I'm not trying to say it's easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's never easy.
Not
and
easy.
and there are people who think that you know when it comes to people who are talking about resistance, whether it's with weapons or non-violent resistance, there are people who mistakenly believe that the form of non-violent resistance is like the weaker alternative. It's not. And people who engage in non-violent resistance are also viciously attacked and arrested and killed. It's not an easier form, but it is a form that reaches the hearts and minds of more people around the world. Uh, if people cannot understand something, they might be able to understand the message.
And when you talk about nonviolent resistance, I want to clarify this, because because I mean, I find that the term means a lot of different things in different contexts. Like in the context of Palestine, or it seems like in some other places, as long as it doesn't involve firearms, like stones thrown at tanks is still a form of nonviolent resistance, right? It's symbolic. It's not
Absolutely.
right. Okay, I just want to
Absolutely.
clarify, because a lot of people from the United States, a lot of people who are adherents to this idea of nonviolence, they take it in this really extreme way, like you can't step on an ant or something. This is but in the Palestinian context, you throw a rock at a tank, and that's still nonviolent civil disobedience.
It is. It is a form of nonviolence, because every time these protests happen, like we have seen them today, especially today, and we've seen them every Friday. We've seen them throughout, the years. When there are nonviolent protests, it doesn't mean that the army would come and say, "Oh, it's a nonviolent protest, so we're not going to attack them." Of course, the army is going to attack, and you have the right to defend yourself. It doesn't mean you just sit there and say, "Give it to me." No, you have the right to defend yourself, and you have resistance in general. Is a legitimate form of trying to liberate yourself, liberate your country, and you have the right to practice resistance in general, including the forms of nonviolent resistance, which right now tend to be more effective because they reach more people, but they are all forms of resistance. And being involved in nonviolent resistance doesn't mean that you're completely safe or nothing else will happen.
That's for sure.
It's
No,
we've seen it. We've seen it with Martin Luther King. We've seen it with Gandhi. We've seen it. We've seen it all over the world.
with the Great March of Return.
The Great March of Return was like they were just sniping the people down.
Yeah, every Friday.
Yeah. So people need to like everything is just when it comes to resistance, there isn't like one solid definition and you go by it. You have to take into consideration which part of the world are you in, which country is occupying you, what are the circumstances around each event. There are
That's
so many
important to know.
things. Yeah, yeah, of course. There are so many variables that have to be taken into consideration.
Saad, one of those variables, I think, and one of those many fascinating connections between the settler society of Israel and the settler society of the United States is is this whole question of identity and the question of like when you talk about knowing what you're about and knowing what you stand for. I'm often that reminds me of the differences between what they call over Palestine way, what they call 48 or not 48, outside of 48, right? They occupied, the 48 occupation as opposed to 67 occupation, right? 48, for those who don't know, is we're talking about what they call, Eretz Israel, right? And then the West Bank and Gaza is outside of 48. So the schooling and what languages people are mainly learning. I mean, there's so many differences in terms of how many Palestinians self-identify, and I just wonder. That's just a topic I just want you to talk about because I think it's really relevant to a lot of people in this country as well.
About the pre-467 and
the question of identity, the question of there are so many people within 48 that like when I was there, most of the Jewish Israelis would talk about Christian Arabs. And they would never say the word Palestinian, and right. And then you have all these, and I know you grew up in the West Bank, so your experience was very different than it would have been if you had grown up within 48. But growing up in a place like Nablus, being subject to the Israeli educational system, I imagine it creates a lot of confusion within a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed about, for example, if we start with Israeli media, depending what type of media you're talking about, if it's right wing, they talk about Arabs, not Christian or Muslim, just Arabs. They even refer to the few Palestinian citizens of Israel as Arabs, which puts them in a different classification. And to them, if we mention the word Palestinian, then we are recognizing that this is Palestine, or at least part of it is Palestine. So they refer to us as Arabs, instead of Palestinians. Of course, you can choose your race or whatever. You can say we're Arabs, and to me, I am a Palestinian. It doesn't matter what language I speak. I'm a Palestinian, and Palestine is my land. Because I can't really, like, especially right now, like when you say Arab, it's like all of those millions of Arabs and all of those Arab countries are lined up, their armies are lined up, or they are going to liberate Palestine. Most of them are traitors anyway. So
it would be nice if the fantasy were true, huh? If it were really true that there's this united army of Arabs who are going to liberate Palestine.
Yeah, but we're talking about leaders in the Arab world who were either instated by Britain or later, and we have they all hate each other, and there isn't like when you say Arab, it's like we're not all one. There are many countries, and there are many countries we've seen right now who are like rushing to normalize with the Israeli occupation and all of these agreements. And then you have someone like in Saudi Arabia who they talk about their support to the Palestinian cause, and at the same time, they are one of the people who, one of the leaders who actually caused this destruction, because those countries aren't really united. And if they really wanted to liberate Palestine, they would have done that a long time ago with the arms. But we're talking about post-colonial leaderships that were put there, and they know their place.
Yeah.
This is one of the things. The other thing is, like, when it comes, if we don't want to talk about the entire so-called Arab world, if you just talk about Palestine, there have been, this division is intentional between an Arab citizen of Israel or a Palestinian citizen of Israel, or versus a Palestinian who is living in the West Bank, Gaza, or East Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's intentional divide and conquer politics on the
It's
part of Israel,
intentional.
right?
It's very intentional. And here's like one small point that people should think about. Easy, simple, but really shows this level of racism and discrimination. Let's say there are two couples, Jewish Israeli couple and Palestinian couple living in Jerusalem, right? They have this couple has a baby and the other couple has a baby. The Israeli couple has a baby and the Palestinian couple has a baby. They are both born in Jerusalem. Both. Which baby is automatically born with Israeli citizenship and the Jerusalem ID? The baby who was born to the Jewish couples, not the Palestinian, their neighbor. So that's part of the policy to divide and conquer too. You live in the same city. The Palestinians who live in Jerusalem, a lot of them, of course, have Israeli issued ID cards because they were born in Jerusalem. But you aren't automatically born with a citizenship because you're Arab or because you're a Palestinian. This is one other thing. And what happens is, and we've seen it happen to many Palestinians who move out of Palestine and start living maybe in the United States or Europe, and they stay there for like more than 6 months to a year, and then even that ID is taken away from them because you aren't considered a citizen. You are just a resident, and you go out of the country for a certain period of time, you lose your residency. Although you were born there, and this is the country of your ancestors, but you are a resident. This is another thing of the Israeli policy. Resident, even you are born there versus a citizen, just because who your parents are.
Yeah, another one of those many, and then there's so many parallels when every time you're mentioning one of these examples, I'm always thinking of there's so many parallels, like the way Native people in the United States are. There's always a new reason to sort of decertify somebody as being officially a member of a tribe. There's always, so the tribes shrink and shrink and shrink because of this kind of constant decertifying because they're no longer qualified for one reason or another. So it doesn't mean you get deported, but it means you're no longer considered native, and that comes with a lot of different legal
absolutely true. Absolutely. And also we have also seen how it happened a few times actually where Israel, there have been some Jewish activists who happen to be American and I think from Europe, but I'm talking about the American Jewish activists who are known for defending Palestinian rights. And we have seen cases. You remember when Israel was trying to deport activists, and even though they were Jewish, like when they would come, some of them were detained and then deported by the Jewish state because they spoke against it, because they spoke against its occupation. This is another form of discrimination that happens. It's while it targets the Palestinians and their international supporters, it also targets the Jews who dare to stand against the occupation. They are considered as traitors to their own country that tries to define itself as the state of the Jewish people, as long as you agree with its colonialist policies. So we have seen this also happen too. It's not only about being a Palestinian. If you are Jewish and you are active against this occupation, and you are also trying to achieve justice for the Palestinians and equality, you are also considered now as part of the of the problem.
Yeah, it's
So
very
to speak.
reminiscent of the way like white supporters of the civil rights movement were targeted by the police, sometimes especially viciously.
Yeah, and we've seen some of them who were imprisoned. Some of them who were deported here. I mean, I'm talking about the Jewish activists. We've seen like a lot of things happen to them because of their activism, which falls under their right to freedom of speech and expression, and aren't in any way, shape, or form harming or causing destruction to anybody. It's just their right, and that's the way they were met with, they were treated with. Although if you are a Palestinian, then the problems against you are compounded, but it doesn't mean that it will not happen to you.
Saad, we're now 10 years, just a little more than 10 years from the rebellions that started in Tunisia and Egypt, and I just and of course it's been a extremely complicated and 10 years full of a hell of a lot of activity and a lot of contradictions and a lot of people dying. And I just very broadly, I'm just wondering what are your impressions of where things are at after 10 years since the so-called Arab Spring?
Yeah, I was hoping you would never ask about that.
It's too complicated, right? I mean, it's just so complicated, right? I mean, I know and then each country, it's a totally different situation, really.
It is a totally different situation.
But there's also connections, right? Fair to say, they're very different situations, but also
there are connections. Always there are connections, and what I would like to say to the people is like, when you see, for example, the United States intervening or supporting certain party against the other, you have to try to analyze the situation, because it's never innocent.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself why. People all over the world have the right to resist and to fight for better future for them and for their children. I'm not gonna be talking here either for or against anything that's happening in Syria or in other Arab countries, but what I'm gonna say is that we have unfortunately seen great influence by the United States and other colonialist powers that meddled directly in what is happening in the so-called Arab Spring, whether we are talking about Egypt, we're talking about Syria, Libya, or any other part. We have seen that American intervention and the repercussion of that intervention, especially when they decide to arm certain group against the other in order to create more conflict. Without going in detail, because people have various opinions. If we talk about Syria, this is just one last thing I want to mention about Syria. One of the biggest concerns about Syria is that the colonialist powers that are trying to support certain parties that are fighting against the Syrian government have something in mind: a divided Syria that can be split into 2 or 3 states, and then it can become a very weak country that they can conquer at any time.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to see a unified Syria. They want to see a divided Syria. Everybody needs to think about that.
Keep that concept in mind that whoever wins, as long as there's division and weakness, then the United States wins. So it's almost like it doesn't matter. To some extent, it's not a question of which who wins, as that no one wins in a sense.
In a sense, yes, especially if they manage to divide the country into various parts.
And someone is wondering what you think of of what's going on in Yemen.
Okay, I see we diverted away from Palestine.
We can go back to Palestine. Yeah, well, sometimes if there's somebody, this was somebody who asked interesting questions before, so I just thought yeah, no, we don't have to talk about Yemen.
Look, I'm gonna try to be as focused on this as
You're very diplomatic. That's good.
we're not a politician though.
No, but you probably have some reason to be diplomatic.
I do have a lot of reasons to be diplomatic.
Yeah, I understand.
If you look about Libya, if you talk about Yemen, there is always an American connection.
Right.
Always. And in many cases, there is also an Israeli connection, especially with those who are trade arms around the world. There is always, like I would tell the people, just think about the American connection. It's always there. You might need to look for it, but it's there. And when America decides to intervene in a certain conflict, you have to ask yourself those questions. Why?
Always.
What's the bigger goal? It's like, it's an American habit, unfortunately. It's like if you go back to the Soviet era, like America thought it's a very good idea to support the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And even Sylvester Stallone in his movie Rambo brags about that, how we supported those Mujahideen who later turned to be the Taliban and whatever. And someone like Osama bin Laden was considered a hero in a big article by the New York Times, like 20 years ago, was it? When they called him a hero fighting for freedom or something. There's always an American connection, and America seems to okay, our goal was achieved, and now we don't care about what's happening over there until it comes and bite us in the what. And then we have another problem. So it's a very, very big subject to be covering.
Very. And
but
speaking of big subjects,
again, I would say look for the American connection.
Look for that's always good advice. There was a joke, I'm sure you've heard, why there's never been a coup in the United States? Because the U.S. doesn't have a U.S. embassy.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah. I think I heard it once.
I mean, I'm not sure if there's never been a coup here, so it's kind of not a very good joke. But it's still, the embassy.
In a way.
Yeah. But speaking of really big subjects, habit a country of 350 million people that you happen to be in right now. Do you have any broad or narrow predictions of the next few months in this crazy place that you've been living in for the past many years now?
Well, one thing I would say, not that the alternative is great, but one of the things I would say that I'm really, really pleased about is that we got rid of Trump.
That's really nice, isn't it?
At least temporarily. It is very nice. Like one of the things, Trump managed to divide not just the Americans, also the Arab world into various.
Really?
Yeah. I've seen and I've been in discussions with people in the Arab world, whether they were Muslims or Christians, who are actually defending Trump. It's something that I can't understand, but this dude managed to create this type of division.
How do they defend him? On what basis? How do they find a corner to like him? Is it?
Some people like him because he's racist against other people
that they don't like.
Yes, that they don't like.
And they don't mind the fact that he's also racist against them. They can overlook that.
They can overlook that if he's also racist against people that they don't like. So that's part of it. But it's a good thing to see him gone. He shouldn't have been the president in the first place, But this is America, so.
And I know this is a bleak subject. I bring up a lot of bleak subjects, I know, but there's been 2 massacres in this country in the past week, I have your friends and family have had a lot of experiences with violence back home. You've been shot 6 times in the back, for example. But here in the United States, your friends, family, relatives have not been entirely free of violence, and I just wonder if you have any thoughts on gun culture and violence in this country that you've directly experienced.
Yeah, I think each country has its own problems. One of the problems this country has is this issue of guns, and also there are a lot of fanatics with very dangerous guns, and a lot of idiots too with very dangerous guns. It's really unfortunate to keep seeing all of those mass shootings happening, or sometimes it's not a mass shooting, because mass shootings, when we talk about them, as ugly as there are, they can be carried by one person who's angry at someone. Maybe they are angry at their school, or fought with their girlfriend or something, and of course they have these devastating outcomes of death and injuries among innocent people, among children. And then you have other forms of shootings that are racist, and they are just directed against certain group of people because of the color of their skin or because of their religion. And that, when you watch the American media talk about it, they they try to see who did it, and if this person is white, it's not terrorism. This is like, what is the definition of terrorism? And it's like, do you have any idea, or that definition only applies if you are categorized in a certain, with a certain category,
I mean,
being
this
an
guy
Arab,
that
being a Muslim, being a,
how
what
about the guy
is,
that blew up downtown Nashville just like a few weeks ago? Remember that? A
well,
white guy
yes,
blew himself up and several blocks in downtown Nashville, and nobody was calling him a terrorist. I mean, this is like clearly, a suicide bombing if ever there was one. But
that's,
he can't be a
yeah,
terrorist. He was a white guy.
they look at the person, uh, when was it? One time I was watching live, uh, I think it was an outdoor concert where there was a band playing, and someone was shooting from a hotel, I believe.
Las Vegas killed like 50, 60 people or something.
I remember when I was like watching the news, and trying to find information on the internet, but on TV, and I believe it was Fox News, because that's what they do. One of the anchors mentioned the word terrorism. Of course, his fellow anchors who were talking live objected, and they said, "Well, we can't yet consider it to be terrorism because we haven't yet seen an Islamic element." Openly on TV,
Right there. Oh my
right
God.
there.
They're
So
supposed
it's
to be
not.
dog whistle about it,
So you shoot a bunch of people who
Oh
are
my
like
God.
listening to music.
Yeah.
That's not an act of terrorism, unless unless you are a Muslim. That then we start defining it as a an act of terrorism. And as a Palestinian, I that, but I'm sure your listeners do not. A lot of them do not know that. I consider myself a Palestinian who also speaks Arabic, because I come from the Arab world, but I'm not a Muslim. You know, I'm from a Christian family that has lived in Palestine. Probably my ancestors followed the star to Bethlehem. So, but we are all, categorized in one category. We are all, when people want to categorize us, as Muslims or terrorists, and it applies to anybody, including including Arab and Palestinian Christians.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Very broad.
it's very, very broad. Yeah, and it applies, like let's say that shooter happened to be a Muslim,
Mm.
but also, like, let's say, of course he wasn't, but let's say he was, and this person has nothing to do with jihad or struggling for religion. Automatically it will be considered terrorism, and automatically they will create a link to whatever group you want.
Yeah.
and call it terrorism. It's like they can just keep searching, let's see. This person, it's like when the shooter or a mass shooter is white, they don't call it terrorism. They start saying, oh, we should try to see the background. Maybe this person has psychological issues, problems with his childhood or upbringing, all of these things, but never a terrorist.
Saad, lastly, I know this is kind of a horrible question. I hate it when people ask me this, I guess, but do you have any hope for the future?
Oh, hope.
Because it doesn't seem like things are getting better, like Martin Luther King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it tends towards justice. And I think that's a really nice thought, but I don't know if it's true.
Hope reminds me of the Obama campaign, change and hope.
It's also a town in Pennsylvania. Oh, and also in Arkansas. Bill Clinton was from Hope, Arkansas, too.
Okay. Well, I don't want to be bleak. I think that we are
Because you have a child?
about to witness a great shift in history, but I believe that step by step you will lose because our future is not yours to choose. You know who said that? You know who said that?
What a great quote.
Yeah, from someone I know.
You remember my songs better than me. That's excellent. Wonderful.
See, I know how to quote you. I still did not quote you on I'm a better anarchist than you, because then you and I are gonna have to fight about that for some time, and I don't think any of us will be convinced who's a better. But
I'll happily give that title to you.
Well, I wanted to wear that shirt, but then I felt cold because it's short sleeves. Yeah.
I'll have to get you a hoodie. I got them in hoodies too. I got a new order too. So
Okay, good. Well, I think you might be running out of time, but you promised me you're gonna sing something, and I think it's not gonna happen anymore.
Oh yeah, I'll have to do that another time because I haven't practiced that song, so I could do a different song. But no, I usually just talk to people in these things.
David,
I'll write another. I'll be putting up a song this afternoon though, and I'll come sing to you at your house.
All right.
I'll come sing in your backyard.
All right, man.
Thank you, Saed. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all for listening and watching.
Bye for now. And thanks everybody for tuning in to this discussion with Saed Bannoura. And you can find it archived on my YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/drovics or go look up This Week with David Rovics wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Remember, don't pay the rent. Mutual aid will get us through. And I'll be doing a concert tomorrow right here in the living room at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, last Saturday of every month. All right. And so I'll see you tomorrow if you're tuning in. And otherwise, I'll see you sometime. Bye for now.